Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, let's start off by welcoming someone back to join us with this video, alright? Great friend of ours. The greatest, of Napoleon's marshals. Bump bump, ba-dum bump, bump bump. Suchet! It's Suchet! How you doing, boy? Alright, he's joining us. Let's do it. Kings and Generals. Thapsus, 46 BC. Last episode. In Africa, Caesar successfully landed. A bit rough. Not the greatest landing in Africa, but landed in Africa and had a pretty good defeat where Curcio failed miserably. But it wasn't the greatest victory, but it was a victory on Caesar's behalf. And let's see what he does. We got only 3 more episodes after this, and we got 2 more of the 30 Years War videos on the playlist over on this channel as well, Kings and Generals. So if you're on the Discord, or get your votes in, because I think it's going to be ending on Sunday. I plan on starting a new series on Monday. Yeah, if you're new to the channel, hello, my name is Connor. I like to learn about history through YouTube videos. Love to have you over on the Discord. Just click on the link. The original link to the video is at the top of the description below. Right below that will be the Discord link. Just click on it. If you love to learn about history and want to join the family, the community over there, love to have you. More the merrier. Pull up a chair, my friend. Unless you're not interested in learning about history, in that case, just get out. Let's go. Thapsus. Caesar's most complicated campaign. Great. All right, let's do it.
Caesar's campaign in Africa had been off to a bad start. He had rushed the invasion, underestimating his opponents, and as a result, suffered a minor defeat.
They are pretty good in North
was
Africa.
Badly outnumbered and poorly supplied. However, as we have seen before, Caesar was often most deadly when backed into a corner. Rather than rushing again, Caesar now focused on collecting reinforcements and supplies, preparing for the upcoming Battle of Thapsus. Gods, I hate Gauls. Oops, sorry, wrong script. But can you blame us? This video is sponsored by Total War Rome Remastered, so our nostalgia is only natural.
I'm going to play through this, least I can do.
Managed to find a perfect formula for the remaster. The game retains the spirit and mechanics that made it one of the best strategy games ever, and improves its features across the board. Relive the legacy that defined the award-winning strategy game series, now with a suite of visual and gameplay improvements that brings the award-winning strategy classic up to modern standards. Build your empire, command ferocious battles.
One sec. Okay. Let's do it.
And conquer the ancient world like never before. The remaster improves and modernizes every aspect of the original. Play it in full 4K with support for ultra-high definition resolution and overhauled graphics. 16 previously unplayable factions have been added on top of the original 22. Players can exercise more control than ever with new features, such as a tactical map during battles, plus heat maps and icon overlays in the campaign.
I'm going to get more coffee. Okay.
Campaign mode. The diplomacy system has been overhauled. Wider camera zoom levels and camera rotation on the campaign map are now available. Total War Rome Remastered includes the Barbarian Invasion and Alexander expansions in glorious new detail, and players will also gain access to the original Rome Total War collection on Windows. It is 50% off for owners of the original game for a limited time. Support our channel and pre-order the definitive version of one of the best strategy games ever by clicking the link in the description. Caesar's first priority was improving the defenses of Ruspina, and creating entrenchments from the town to his camp and to the sea. In doing so, Caesar ensured his communication lines would be kept safe, while also providing a safe landing ground for any reinforcements and supplies. Caesar had been surprised by Labienus' tactic of mixing light troops with cavalry, and decided
is
to
no joke.
mimic it, pulling light marines and archers off his ships in order to do so. Meanwhile, Scipio was en route to unite his force with Labienus and Petreius, bringing with him almost all of the Optimate leaders and the entirety of their army, bringing its total to more than 60,000. Such an army would have already been larger than the one Pompey had, and to make matters worse for Caesar, there was also a possibility that the king of Numidia, Juba, would join Scipio with his own force, including its famed elephants. With fortifications improved, Caesar turned his attentions to supplies. The Optimates had previously stripped the area of corn, and most of the local workforce was pressed into their army, making the harvest of that year particularly poor. Caesar was forced to purchase supplies from wealthy individuals living in the area and rationed them out to his army. A number of his scattered transports were hunted down by the Optimate navy and were captured or burned. Caesar ordered the remainder of his vessels to patrol the harbour of Ruspina to keep the area clear for the anticipated arrival of troops and supplies from
Why not
Sicily.
just capture them all? Why burn any of the ships?
Just when things were starting to look disastrous, Caesar had a stroke of luck. The Optimate army under Scipio had paused briefly at Utica, where Cato, the figurehead and political leader of the faction, was based. While the army was there, Cato began chastising Pompey's sons for failing to achieve as much as their father had by their age. Shamed and hoping to prove himself, Gnaeus took 2,000 slaves and freedmen and attacked the nearby kingdom of West Mauritania, ruled by King Bogud. The Mauritanians lured Gnaeus close to the town of Ascarum before sallying out and quickly defeating the small force. Humiliated, Gnaeus withdrew to the Balearic Islands, but his actions had far-reaching consequences. Having left a sizable garrison at Utica, Scipio now marched to Labienus and Petreius, uniting the two armies and establishing camp 5 kilometers from Caesar's position. They immediately began using their large cavalry forces to keep Caesar within his fortifications.
You guys paying attention? Paying attention, Suchet?
Making his
I'm not, apparently, because I missed the last one.
camp 5 kilometers from Caesar's position. They immediately began using their large cavalry forces to keep Caesar within his fortifications, making his supply situation even worse. Juba began marching to his allies, hoping to assist in a quick and definitive win over Caesar, but Gnaeus' actions now showed their consequence. The king of East Mauritania, Bocchus, heard of Juba's departure and invaded Numidia to avenge the Optimate attack on his brother Bogud. Commanding the Mauritanian armies was Publius Sittius, who had been operating in Africa as a mercenary since the Catiline conspiracy. He successfully captured...
Sorry, I was told to read these things. Caesar, also accused of being involved in the Catilinarian conspiracy, may have been acquainted with Sittius, but this is disputed by some sources.
The Numidian city of Cirta, and then proceeded to pillage and sack the surrounding area. By this point, Juba had almost reached Scipio, but upon hearing the news,
I gotta shut up.
In city of Cirta, and then proceeded to pillage and sack the surrounding area. By this point, Juba had almost reached Scipio, but upon hearing the news, pulled back to defend Numidia. Meanwhile, some of the local citizens had begun sending messages to Caesar, complaining of the harsh rule.
Prior to Caesar's landing, the Optimates have plundered their herds and stolen their grain and burnt their farms and fields. The locals were also forcefully conscripted into their army.
Optimates. Some towns even requested garrisons, pledging to feed and house them in return, an offer Caesar gladly accepted, sending 3 cohorts in order to improve his supply situation. Initially, Caesar planned to wait for better weather to ensure his troops would make the crossing from Sicily safely, but now he ordered that they be sent no matter the conditions, showing how desperate he was. Scipio was not idle while all this was going on. Labienus, in command of the majority of the Optimate cavalry, kept up a relentless harassment campaign, fighting a number of skirmishes with Caesar's cavalry that ventured out to patrol. Labienus kept searching for ways of keeping Caesar's forces occupied, including attacking the towns of Leptis and Aquila, but he was repelled by Caesar's cohorts now garrisoned there. Nevertheless, these attacks were effective at keeping the pressure on Caesar. Similarly, Scipio would march his army out of camp every day and draw them into battle formation, including the elephants, hoping to intimidate the recruits in Caesar's army. Caesar made a show of indifference, keeping his men at work on their fortifications, but he never drew up his own army for battle. He knew that for any chance of victory, he would need more men, particularly more veterans. His best play was to keep his men behind their fortifications of trenches and palisades and bide his time. His patience paid off.
Oh, cool. Sallust was one of the admirals in Caesar's army, and he would become a historian after the war, writing some of the most important histories of his time, such as the Jugurthine Wars.
Sallust had arrived in Caecina, the site of a large Optimate grain supply, which was poorly defended. He easily chased off the garrison and immediately sent the supplies to Caesar. Simultaneously, two experienced legions, the 13th and 14th, were finally dispatched from Lilybaeum. Good luck with the weather and Caesar's patrolling fleet allowed all the legions and supplies to arrive at Ruspina with relative ease. Soon after, Scipio sent 2 Gaetulian spies into Caesar's camp to assess the new situation. However, the Gaetuli, who had greatly benefited from the actions of Caesar's uncle-in-law, Gaius Marius, during and after the Jugurthine War, immediately defected to Caesar. They informed him of Scipio's numbers and the morale of his men, in particular that the Optimate 4th and 6th legions were wavering and eager to join Caesar. Though Scipio and Labienus had done well to keep up the pressure, they had delayed too long and lost the initiative. Caesar now had the men and supplies he needed to go on the offensive, and wanted to force a battle with Scipio before the Numidian army would return. On the 25th of January, he sent the transports back to Sicily to get the rest of his army, and then marched his full force out of the camp. His first objective was to take and fortify the semicircle ridge of hills that surrounded the town. Looking to use similar tactics to those at Dyrrhachium, Caesar quickly seized as many of these hills as he could, ordering fortifications to be built to create a line of palisades across the tops of the hills. Hoping to force Caesar back to his original position, Scipio marched his full army out of camp with Labienus in command of the vast cavalry force, drawing up for battle. Caesar initially thought this was a bluff, but when the enemy approached in formation, he drew his legions up on the hills for battle, sending a small detachment of Spanish auxiliaries to seize one hill still held by Scipio. The Numidians holding the position there were quickly chased away, and Labienus led the majority of his right wing of cavalry to cover their retreat. Caesar noticed that Labienus had
Do not sleep on Labienus. He is very capable.
moved too far from the main Optimate battle line, and sent his own left wing of cavalry to charge through the hole, before turning back to attack Labienus from the rear. A large estate prevented Labienus from seeing this movement until the enemy cavalry was already behind him.
Oh, smart.
With the cavalry pushing from his rear and the Spanish auxiliaries attacking from the front, Labienus was caught in a pincer and ordered a withdrawal. He and the fast Numidian horsemen were able to extract themselves, but his Gallic and Germanic cavalry was slower. They were surrounded, and despite brave resistance, cut down to a man. Seeing that his right flank was in shambles, Scipio quickly ordered a retreat and pulled back to his camp. Feeling robbed, Caesar did the same. However, soon he tried to force a battle again, this time marching his army towards the town of Uzita, a major water source for Scipio, which was located just outside the Optimate camp. Scipio marched his army out of camp, positioning them on either side.
Can I just say, I love how different terrain affects... This should be a obvious, but when you think about it, when I think about it, it's just really cool how different terrain just... Like, water supply, no matter where in the world, or whatever climate or environment the battle is taking place in, any given battle, cutting off water supply is always important. But especially in northern Africa, I'm not sure how much the environment has changed since, 2,000 years ago. It's just even more crucial and, can really hurt the people who don't have the water supply. It is obvious, but I wanted to point it out.
In a strong defensive position. Eagerly, Caesar again drew his men up for battle, but was reluctant to attack Scipio in such a strong location. For the remainder of the day, the armies stood opposite each other until Caesar ordered a retreat. Frustrated once more, Caesar returned to his camp and continued to further fortify his position on the ridge. Scipio had been delaying for a good reason. Immediately after the cavalry skirmish where the Gallic and Germanic cavalry had been lost, he had sent word to Juba demanding his help. Juba, who owed his kingdom to Pompey, obliged. He left his general Sabura, the victor of Bagradas, to fight Sitius, and marched to Scipio with 3 Numidian legions trained in the Roman style, 800 heavy cavalry, more light infantry and cavalry, and 30 more elephants. The Optimates now had 8 Roman and 3 Numidian legions, approximately 55,000 men, almost 16,000 cavalry, 60 elephants, and perhaps as many as 20,000 light infantry, a total of around 90,000 men, a truly colossal force. Scipio thought that it was his turn to go on the offensive. His fleet had been hunting down any of Caesar's ships that had been blown astray in the crossing from Sicily, and the prisoners were brought to him. He now displayed a number of captured veterans of the 14th outside his camp, and had them tortured to death there and their bodies left outside. He also once again began drawing his army out to veterans of the 14th outside his camp, and had them tortured to death there and their bodies left outside. He also once again began drawing his army out of camp every day to further intimidate Caesar and his men. These actions had the opposite effect, however. The execution of his men enraged Caesar, and he was also encouraged by Juba's numbers. They weren't as significant as he feared, which meant that Sitius was distracting much of the Numidian force, and confirmed that Scipio had no more aces left up his sleeve. Following this, a deadlock emerged. Both sides regularly drew up for battle, but no serious engagement was fought, neither wanting to be the one to attack a fortified opponent. A number of cavalry skirmishes were fought, with neither side able to gain a significant advantage over the other. 2 more veteran legions, the 10th and 9th, arrived, and Caesar attempted to use them to break the stalemate, constructing 2 long entrenchments from his camp to Utiza, despite the constant harassment from Labienus's cavalry. A new camp was made at the end of these entrenchments, where siege weapons such as scorpions and catapults were constructed.
Let's just give a round of applause to all those war engineers throughout history and laborers who construct all of these, ramparts and whatnot. They're so crucial.
And began bombarding Utiza. Caesar's constant pressure and the close proximity of his new camp to that of Scipio's encouraged some of the Optimate troops, mainly Gaetulians, but also a number of men from the 4th and 6th legions, to change sides. Scipio couldn't allow this to go on, and once again ordered his army to get into battle formation. Caesar did the same, but the broken ground in front of Scipio's army dissuaded him from attacking, despite the 2 armies now being less than 200 meters apart. After squaring off for half a day, Caesar withdrew back into camp. That is when Labienus launched an attack on Caesar's retreating cavalry and light infantry. The legions were close enough to prevent a complete disaster, but the attack gave Caesar food for thought. It was only a matter of time.
I'll tell you, Labienus is a smart dude.
Labienus was able to strike a deadly blow with his superior cavalry numbers. Soon word was sent that the last 2 legions Caesar pegged for this campaign, the 7th and 8th, were en route from Sicily. He also heard from some deserters that Varus, who had been stationed at Utica with the Optimate fleet, planned to attack them on the crossing. Immediately, Caesar rode to Leptis himself, took command of his fleet. I love that music.
Whenever you hear this music, you know stuff's about to go down in Kings and Generals videos.
Being stationed at Utica with the Optimate fleet, planned to attack them on the crossing. Immediately, Caesar rode to Leptis himself, took command of his fleet, and surprised Varus. The Optimate fleet was chased away, and the Caesarian legions were guided to land safely. Caesar now felt comfortable enough to send 2 legions out of his fortifications to find supplies in the nearby estates. At this point, Optimate deserters informed Caesar of an ambush planned by Labienus, and Caesar managed to surprise his old ally, killing 500 light infantrymen and routing the Numidian cavalry. Unfortunately for Caesar, his legions were unsuccessful in their foraging, making it clear that he needed to move his entire army to find food. Caesar left a garrison in Rispina, burnt his camp, and marched out with his full force. He foraged the area around Agar and Seta, constantly shadowed by Scipio's army. After foraging around Seta, Caesar began retreating to his camp roughly 23 kilometers away, but was once again attacked by Labienus and his Numidian cavalry and light infantry.
Caesar, Labienus, and Pompey have been my 3 favorite generals so far.
This time, Labienus kept up
Rest
the attack,
in peace, Pompey.
retreating when Caesar's men turned to confront him, and then continuing the harassment as soon as they began marching again. Caesar's cavalry took the brunt of these attacks, and he was eventually forced to pull them from the rear and use his legions to fend off the Numidians. His heavy infantry took less damage than his cavalry, but his army was now moving incredibly slowly, only managing to cover 300 meters in 4 hours. Night finally set in, and Labienus withdrew his troops. But he had been successful in doing significant damage to Caesar's already much smaller cavalry force. Impressed by how effective Numidian light cavalry and light infantry had been against him, Caesar began drilling his men in tactics to combat them, such as how far to retreat from them and when they should turn and throw javelins. He was soon met by the last Sicilian reinforcements, bringing his force to 12 legions, 5 newly raised and 7 veteran, roughly 3,000 to 5,000 cavalry, and an unknown number of light infantry. Caesar's veteran legions had taken casualties. Some might even be at only half strength, and so establishing the size of Caesar's army is difficult, but a number of around 60 to 70,000 seems reasonable. Though outnumbered overall, Caesar had more veterans than Scipio, as the Optimate army was largely made of fresh recruits and conscripts. Caesar also brought elephants from Italy. Although useless in battle and intended for the Roman games, they allowed Caesar to train his troops. His men were taught where the elephants were vulnerable, even in armor, and his cavalry practiced throwing dummy javelins at them, familiarizing the horses with the elephant's smell and sound. It is a testament to Caesar's generalship that even on campaign he still took the time to train his troops to address new threats. The stalemate continued. Caesar was moving from town to town looking for supplies, with Scipio shadowing him. Labienus attempted to keep up his skirmishing campaign while Caesar marched, but Caesar's training had paid off. 300 men from each legion were assigned to not carry any baggage and instead act as a quick response rearguard, fending off all of Labienus's harassing attacks. Finally, Caesar had enough. Time and again he had formed up his army for battle, only for Scipio to decline. The towns in the area that he raided were not important enough to force a reaction, and Labienus's attacks remained a constant source of frustration. Caesar needed to be able to force Scipio into a situation where he had no choice but to fight. So on April 4th, Caesar abandoned his camp at night and moved to Thapsus. Thapsus was a major city in the area, holding a large port, supplies, and arms and armor. It was a target that Scipio would not be able to ignore a threat to. Caesar, having marched through the night, soon arrived at the city, immediately besieging it and fortifying his own position against a possible Optimate attack. Outside of the city of Thapsus was the Marsh of Mocninae, which effectively forced any approaching army to take one of two narrow passages, hugging either the northern or eastern coast. Caesar had chosen his target well. He established two forts, one in the eastern passage, which was garrisoned by 3 cohorts, which effectively blocked that pass, and one surrounding the city of Thapsus. His strategy was to force Scipio to take the northern passage, meaning Scipio would be forced to attack him from only one direction. Scipio soon arrived on the scene. He initially intended to take the eastern passage, but seeing Caesar's fort, abandoned this idea. Leaving a small force under Afranius opposite Caesar's fort, he ordered Juba, Labienus, and the Numidian cavalry to encamp in a separate camp nearby. He then commanded a forced march around the west of the marsh to the northern pass with the rest. It seems that Scipio's strategy was to try and catch Caesar in a pincer, hoping to eventually make a simultaneous push on his position through both passages.
Smart.
Quickly, Scipio ordered part of his men to begin construction of a second camp, while the rest of his army drew up for battle in front of them, with the elephants on either flank in front of his cavalry. Caesar could not believe his luck. Scipio had taken the bait and was now offering battle under terrible conditions. His men were already fatigued by the long march. Part of his army was building a camp, and a significant portion of his army, including most of the Numidian cavalry, was too far away. Leaving 2 of the rookie legions encamped around Thapsus, Caesar eagerly formed up the rest for battle. He deployed his army in the classic 3 lines. The 10th and 7th legions were stationed on the right, and the 8th and 9th on the left. The center was likely held by 2 of the other veteran legions, the 13th and 14th, with a recruit legion on either side of them. Mixing recruit and veteran legions like this was a favored strategy of Caesar's. His last legion, the 5th, was split into 2 and stationed behind each flank, acting as a 4th line. Their role was specifically to handle the elephants. In case of a charge from them, the front lines would part and it would be up to the 5th to kill them. Archers, slingers, and light infantry mixed with cavalry held his extreme flanks. Caesar and his men noticed a lot of movement and jostling in Scipio's line as men moved to and from the camp. His veterans, many of whom were already supposed to be retired and who had spent the last couple of months frustrated by the lack of a decisive battle, urged Caesar to attack. Caesar was hesitant, perhaps thinking that it must surely be a trap. It is also worth noting at this point that Plutarch claims that Caesar had an epileptic fit before the battle, which perhaps was the reason for the delay. His veterans, however, had had enough. A trumpeter of the 10th or 7th, without Caesar's orders, sounded the charge, and Caesar's right flank surged forward. Realizing
I've heard of epileptic. Really interesting.
that there would be no way of restraining his men, Caesar decided that he must fully commit and rode ahead to the 10th and 7th to take personal command of them. He ordered the slingers and archers on the right to target Scipio's elephants opposite them, panicking the beasts and sending them rampaging into their own lines.
That's a good point. What I've always thought, elephants, although they might seem like a big target, just the fear factor and intimidation factor could have enough, worsen the nerves of the opposing army, but they could also end up, if they're frightened too much, whatever, just charging back into your own army.
At the same time, the elephants on Scipio's right charged Caesar's left, but his legions quickly parted as they were trained to, the cohorts of the 5th Legion taking the brunt of their charge. They fought bravely, using spears to jab at the vulnerable and sensitive points on the elephants, blasting trumpets loudly to further frighten them. The elephants were soon panicked and turned to run back.
That's cool. The symbol for the 5th Legion would become an elephant in recognition of the bravery in this
To
battle.
Scipio's army. Scipio's line was now being charged by his own elephants, with Caesar's legions following close behind. Panic had set in almost immediately. The left, fighting Caesar's 10th and 7th, was the first to break, the entire line following shortly after. Some tried to fight, but most were stampeding towards the camp that was still being built. Caesar now had all the momentum, and his men easily cut down the fleeing and disorganized Optimate forces, as well as those who were constructing the camp. The garrison at Thapsus attempted to sally out to distract Caesar's army, but the 2 legions left in the camp easily repelled it. These legions then marched down the eastern corridor to the camps of Afranius and Juba. In a full-scale rout, Scipio's men fled around the western edge of the marsh, desperately trying to reach these camps, with Caesar's men in hot pursuit. It was a disaster for the Optimates. When Scipio's men reached the forts, they found Afranius' camp already overrun and Juba's being assaulted by Caesar's 2 other legions. The Numidian king, seeing Caesar's main
Where's the 10th Legion? I know that's his best legion. Right there.
force now approaching, gave up the fight and retreated with Labienus, Petreius, and what cavalry he had left. Caesar's force stormed his camp, easily taking it. Caesar's men massacred many. Dio blames this on Caesar. However, most sources say Caesar ordered the men be spared, but that his battle-frenzied soldiers disobeyed. It seems likely that Caesar did not order the massacre. A master propagandist, Caesar knew the power of mercy and was renowned, even in his time, for sparing the vast majority of his Roman
I really do love Caesar now.
enemies. The battle was over. Some sources suggest that the Optimates lost 10,000, others suggesting as many as 50,000, while Caesar's losses were as little as 50 or as many as 1,000. It was a decisive victory for Caesar. Following the battle,
By the way, Hearts of Iron, I'm broke, but when I get my next, revenue from YouTube, I think like the 19th, game time.
Optimate leadership was scattered. Labienus, Varus, and Pompey's son Sextus had managed to escape and would eventually make it to Spain, where they would continue to resist Caesar. Afranius, along with Faustus Cornelius Sulla, collected the survivors and began pillaging Mauritania, planning to gather enough supplies to then also cross to Spain. However, they were caught by Sitius and then killed.
Sitius.
Petreius and Juba fled to Numidia, confident they would find
Sitius has really helped out Caesar this episode. I'd like to learn more about him.
Petreius and Juba fled to Numidia, confident they would find support there. Sitius had been successful in defeating and killing Juba's general Sabura, however, and the Numidians now turned on their king, barring their gates to him. With no options left, the two men decided to commit suicide.
Wow.
They had a final dinner and settled on dueling each other, so that at least one of them may die honorably in battle. Juba won the duel, killing Petreius, and then had one of his slaves kill him. As for Scipio, he too...
depending on how poorly, they are slaves. I wonder if that slave took any joy, or maybe it was a more well-treated or upper guy. But it's funny that, one of them is going to be killed honorably. So, would both of them, want to lose the duel?
Who hoped to retreat to Spain. Gathering a few supporters and a small fleet, he set sail, but was caught in a storm and forced to make port at Hippo. Caesar's fleet, commanded by Sitius, found him, and a minor naval battle was fought. When defeat here was inevitable, Scipio killed himself, the last Scipio of any real historical note. The only Optimate leader left in Africa was Cato in Utica. As Caesar's army closed in, he made his final preparations. he held a feast.
Can you guys tell me, I missed it somewhere, but who exactly are the Optimates? I know it's been mentioned, but so are they the leaders in Northern Africa?
With his friends, and then retires to his bedroom, leaving his children in the care of Lucius Caesar, a distant cousin of Caesar's, though a supporter of Pompey, telling his son, "I, who have been brought up in freedom with the right of free speech, cannot in my old age change and learn slavery instead." He then read Plato's Phaedra, and after finishing it, stabbed himself in the stomach. In death, Cato did rob Caesar of what would have been one of his greatest triumphs.
So he committed seppuku?
Of being able to claim that he spared the life of his greatest enemy. Caesar was extremely frustrated by Cato's suicide, apparently saying, "Cato, I begrudge thee thy death, for thou didst begrudge me the preservation of thy life." Caesar spent of thy life. Caesar spent some time in Africa, finding those who had funded the Optimate war effort, before finally returning to Rome victorious. He retired many of his oldest veterans in a generous fashion, and held 4 triumphs, one for Gaul, Egypt, Asia, and Africa. Having defeated Cato, his position was now supreme. He was assigned incredible power. Retired many of his oldest veterans, spent some time in Africa, finding those who had funded the Optimate war effort, before finally returning to Rome victorious. He retired many of his oldest veterans in a generous fashion, and held 4 triumphs, one for Gaul, Egypt, Asia, and Africa. Having defeated Cato, his position was now supreme. He was assigned incredible powers by the Senate, including censorial powers for 3 years, and dictatorial powers for 10, a wholly unprecedented level of power. For all intents and purposes, Caesar was now the sole ruler of the Roman Republic. However, though he had now twice won the civil war, once at Pharsalus and once at Thapsus, the war was not over. The sons of Pompey, Varus, and Labienus still resisted him in Spain. More battles were to come, and we're going to cover them soon, so
like Suchet, Spain, Suchet.
Make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the
awesome video. I think I'm going to do the next episode too. All right? See you guys next time.